I died at 3 a.m. hit by a truck while working my third job just to afford a wife. I woke up in ancient China, no money, a war tax I can't pay, and 2 weeks before I get shipped off to die building city walls. Then the village chief showed up at my door and offered me 7 wives and 30 sacks of rice. In my last life, I nearly killed myself trying to afford one. This time, I said yes before he finished talking. I woke up on a hard wooden bed in a small mud hut. The last thing I remembered was riding my scooter at 3 a.m. when a truck slammed into me. Back in my old life, I was an orphan working 3 jobs, just trying to scrape together the 300,000 yuan bride price my girlfriend's mom was demanding. Now I was in a completely different world, like something out of ancient times. I'd become a poor farmer named Jiang Yuwei. No parents, no money, no wife. Same as before, except worse. There was a war going on, and everyone had to pay a head tax. If I couldn't pay within half a month, I'd be shipped off to build city walls, and nobody ever came back from that. Then the village chief, Old Wang, showed up with a crowd. He said the government wanted to boost the population, so they were sending 7 women to our village. Every man had to take a wife. But nobody wanted extra mouths to feed or extra taxes to pay, so they wanted me to take all 7. My friend Dong tried to warn me. He said I could barely feed myself. 7 more people meant 7 more tax bills. But Old Wang sweetened the deal. 30 sacks of rice, 1 from each household if I agreed. They also promised to fix up my house and help with farming. I pretended to think it over, but inside I was thrilled. In my last life, I'd nearly worked myself to death trying to afford 1 wife. Now 7 were being handed to me for free, with rice on top. When the officials dropped off the women and left, I got a good look at them. They were all young. The youngest was maybe 7 or 8, the oldest around 17. Their faces were dirty, clothes torn, eyes full of fear. They dropped to their knees in front of me, begging to stay, listing everything they could do: cook, sew, farm, haul water. My heart sank. I knew what real struggle looked like. I told them to get up. No one kneels in this house. We're family now. Come on, I said. Let's cook some rice. They were stunned that I'd actually share food with them. I knew 30 sacks wouldn't last long with 8 mouths, but I wasn't worried. I still had my physics degree from my old life. I dug up an old bow in the house, rigged a simple pulley system, and turned it into a makeshift compound bow. I told the women to gather firewood while I headed into the mountains to hunt. As I left, I caught them staring at my strange bow. What I didn't know yet was that they had secrets of their own. The oldest one had a small knife hidden in her sleeve and was already whispering about running away. But none of that mattered right then. I needed to bring home food. For the first time across 2 lifetimes, things were starting to look up. I headed out early with my homemade compound bow. On the trail, I ran into Old Wang and some of the village hunters. They laughed at me. One said, "He can't even catch a pheasant. How's he gonna feed 7 wives?" Old Wang predicted I'd come back empty-handed. I just smiled and kept walking. Halfway up the mountain, I tested the bow. The pulleys moved smoothly. The draw felt solid. Then I spotted a fat rabbit in the grass. I drew, aimed, and released. The arrow hit clean through the throat. My first real kill. I nearly shouted out loud. By midday, I had 5 rabbits, enough for a few days. I was heading back when I heard rustling in the bushes. I crept closer and saw a massive wild boar chewing on a pheasant. My heart kicked up. Dangerous. But that much meat was worth a fortune. I put an arrow into its side. The boar screamed and charged straight at me, eyes blood red, tusks gleaming. I stumbled backward, hands shaking, and fumbled a second arrow. When it was just a few meters out, I forced myself to steady, aimed at its head, and fired. The arrow punched through its eye and into the skull. The boar dropped and went still. My legs gave out. I nearly hit the ground myself. The thing was enormous, maybe 400 or 500 pounds. No way I was moving it alone. Luckily, I found some hunters on the mountain and promised them payment for help. When we rolled into the village, everyone stopped and stared. The other hunters had spent all day barely scraping together a few skinny rabbits and some sparrows. I came back with a giant boar, 5 rabbits, and a pheasant. Old Wang's pipe fell right out of his mouth. Everyone crowded around asking how I'd done it. I just said I got lucky. Some people joked that heaven was giving me one good meal before my luck ran out. But not everyone was happy. I didn't notice it then, but 2 troublemakers, Wang Biao and Hassan, were watching me with hungry eyes, already scheming to rob me when I sold the meat. They had other ideas about my wives, too. I had no clue what was coming. Back home, the women were shocked. They'd figured I'd ditched them. Instead, I showed up half dead, dragging a boar behind me. They jumped into action immediately, boiling water, sharpening knives, cleaning rabbits. I watched the shift happen in their eyes. The fear was fading, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. They assumed I was some seasoned hunter who'd been bold enough to take 7 wives because he could provide for them. The truth? This was my first hunt ever. The smell of roasting meat drifted across the whole courtyard. I was starving, so I pulled off a piece of rabbit and popped it in my mouth. Then I noticed all 7 women were just standing there, staring at the food but not reaching for it. I waved them over. The girl in the blue dress asked quietly whether they were actually allowed to eat. That's when it hit me. In this world, women didn't eat until the men were finished. They got whatever was left over. I handed her a rabbit leg and said, "I hunted all of this for us." One by one, they reached out and took food. They ate fast, like they hadn't had a real meal in a long time. 3 rabbits, the pheasant, and most of the boar disappeared. One of the skinnier girls started crying and called me a good man. I told them there were no hard rules in this house. As long as I had food, nobody was going hungry. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. One asked why I was being so kind. "Because you're human beings," I said, "not animals. Men and women are the same to me. Everyone deserves food, warmth, and dignity." Several of them started crying. Maybe nobody had ever said that to them before. That night, I called over the oldest one. She was around 17, still caked in dirt, but she carried herself differently than the others. I told her to go wash up. When she came back clean, I stopped in my tracks. She was striking, fair skin, sharp eyes, a natural grace you don't often see. I asked her name. She said Chrysanthemum at first, then admitted her real name was Sukshu. I told her to put on the cleanest clothes I had. She went pale, clearly thinking I meant something else. I just meant her clothes were in shreds. She relaxed, still looking confused. I put her in charge of the other women. She knew how to keep accounts, which was valuable. I told her tomorrow she'd come with me to the market to sell the boar. We needed rice, clothes, bedding, and most urgently, money for the head tax. 8 people meant 8 tax bills, and we only had half a month. Then I told her I'd sleep in the living room. She and the others could split the 2 bedrooms. She looked baffled, the man of the house taking the worst spot. But I was too exhausted to explain. I lay down and was out cold in seconds. I didn't know it, but after I fell asleep, they were talking about me. Yuwei told her younger sister Manman about the market plan. Manman couldn't believe I hadn't tried anything. Sukshu said I was different. When I looked at them, there was no greed in my eyes, but she still wasn't ready to fully trust me. She was hiding something, a secret about who she really was. She decided tomorrow's market trip would be her chance to figure me out. I knew none of this. I was just dead asleep. Early the next morning, Sukshu and I loaded the boar onto a borrowed cart and headed to the market. Before we left, she smeared charcoal dust across her face to hide how she looked. Smart move. A pretty girl standing out in a crowded market was asking for trouble. On the way, I made small talk. She mentioned that as a child she used to go to the market with her father. Then she went quiet. I didn't push. When we arrived, the boar drew a crowd instantly. A butcher offered 5 taels for the whole thing. I was about to take it. Then Sukshu grabbed my sleeve and pitched me an idea. It was brilliant. I stepped back and let her run it. She broke the boar down by cut, legs, ribs, tenderloin, head, and auctioned each piece separately to the highest bidder. She told buyers exactly which cuts were best for curing, braising, or stir-frying. The merchants loved it and started bidding against each other. In under an hour, everything was sold. I counted the money, over 7 taels, 2 more than the original offer. I was genuinely impressed. I asked if she'd done business before. She said her father had been a merchant and she'd learned from him. Then her eyes went distant and she shut down. Something was off. A refugee who bargains like a professional trader? Her story didn't add up. Then a man in a silk robe approached. He introduced himself as Wei Le, manager of the Yong Trading Company. He asked if we had more game to sell regularly. I jumped on it and told him we were professional hunters who could supply him consistently. He was thrilled and invited us into his shop. Yong Trading Company was the biggest business in the entire region. Its owner, Young Shirchong, was the wealthiest man in Yongnan. The moment we walked in, I noticed Shirshur staring at the golden sign with tears welling up in her eyes. I couldn't figure out why, but I let it go. Inside, I picked up rice, fabric, quilts, 7 sets of clothing, women's clothes, salt, spices, and an iron pot. After the discount, the total came to 3 taels and 6 coins, half of Bo's money gone. But everyone back home needed these things, especially the women. Shirshur seemed surprised that I'd bought clothes for them but nothing for myself. Then I asked the manager for something different: refractory clay, graphite crucibles, quenching oil, and blacksmithing materials. His eyebrows shot up. He asked what a hunter would need all that for. I leaned in close and whispered something to him. Whatever I said, his eyes lit up and he immediately went to arrange everything. Shusher was watching me with a confused look. She asked the same question. Why does a hunter need blacksmithing supplies? I just smiled. I had plans that nobody could understand yet. By sunset, we'd spent nearly all the money, 3 taels on regular supplies and 3 taels on the blacksmithing materials. The cart was packed, and we were heading home. On the forest trail, 4 masked men stepped out with knives. It was Wang Biao and his gang, the village troublemakers. They wanted our goods, our money, and Shusher. I stayed calm. I'd already stashed a bag of lime powder and a thick wooden club under the seat, just in case. I played along like I was giving up, even telling Shusher to step down from the cart. The pain in her eyes hit hard. She thought I was handing her over. The moment Wang Biao moved toward her, I hurled the lime powder straight into their faces. They started screaming, clawing at their eyes. I grabbed the club and beat them hard. Every swing came with the same message: never touch my people. I pulled off their masks. Wang, Biao, and Hosen, exactly who I figured. I took their money, 2 taels of silver and some copper coins. I told them it was the price of their lives. Then I snapped the club against a rock to make the message crystal clear and kicked them into the woods. They ran off shouting threats. When I turned back to Shusher, she had a knife pointed straight at me. She was shaking. She genuinely believed I'd abandoned her. I raised my hands and calmly walked her through what had happened. It was all part of the plan. I needed them to let their guard down so the lime would do its job. She finally settled down, but as she stepped forward, she slipped on a rock, and the knife went straight into my thigh. She went pale. I told her it was fine. She tore a strip from her sleeve and bandaged the wound. Internally, I laughed. The bandits couldn't land a single hit on me, but my own wife managed to stab me. Back home, the other 6 women were overjoyed to see the new supplies: clothes, quilts, rice, vegetables. Chen Lianyu, the 3rd wife, spotted my bandaged leg and pulled me inside. I said I'd just taken a fall. Shusher looked stunned that I'd covered for her. Later, she brought me porridge and asked why I'd lied. I said, "She's my wife, why would I blame her?" She let out a slow breath and admitted that if I kept earning her respect like this, being married to me might not be so bad after all. But I knew she didn't really believe a simple village man could be like this. I didn't know her full story yet, but her eyes told me she came from a completely different world, and she was already planning to take her sister and leave the moment she'd rested up. She didn't want to drag me into her problems. What I didn't know was that at that very moment, Wang Biao and his crew were hiding near the river, plotting their revenge. They planned to break into my house that night, hurt my family, and burn everything down. But right then, I didn't know any of that. Lying in bed with a bandaged leg and a bowl of warm porridge, I felt something I had never felt in either of my 2 lifetimes: the warmth of a real home. That night, Shusher helped me build an iron furnace. I put my physics degree to full use: double-layered walls, spiral air channels, and a double-action bellows that pushed air from both directions. Shusher kept firing questions at me. She'd never seen anything like it. Honestly, nobody in this world had. By the next afternoon, I opened the furnace and molten iron poured out, glowing red gold. Shusher couldn't believe it. She said even the top craftsmen in the region took full days to melt iron, and I'd done it overnight. I explained that my furnace could reach temperatures above 1,400 degrees, far beyond anything normal. I slipped and said Celsius out loud. She caught it immediately. I brushed it off as a technical term, but I could tell her mind was racing. She was no ordinary refugee. She understood exactly how valuable this technology was. I could feel her attitude shifting in real time. She'd wanted to leave, now she wanted to stay. That's exactly what I was going for. When a woman starts taking genuine interest in a man, that's where everything begins. Then she noticed my wound had reopened, the one from her knife. Working the bellows had torn it back open. She took me inside to rebandage it. She smelled like snow lotus and morning dew. I couldn't help but notice. She told me to pull my pants up so she could see the wound. I was distracted and accidentally pulled everything down instead. She screamed and squeezed her eyes shut. Her face turned bright red. I panicked and fixed my clothes as fast as I could, apologizing over and over. It was genuinely an accident. After an awkward silence, I lay down on the bed and she knelt beside me, applying the medicine. Her hands were soft but trembling. A few strands of her hair brushed against my leg. My heart was pounding. When she finished the bandage, she quickly stood up to leave, but I caught her hand and asked her to stay. She tensed up immediately and told me to let go. I released her hand and explained that I just wanted her to come with me to see Lin, my neighbor the blacksmith. She relaxed right away. We walked over to his place, and before we even reached the door, we could hear arguing. His wife, Xiao Zhuan, was yelling about the salary being cut and not being able to afford the head tax. When she saw me, she assumed I was there to freeload again and started laying into me, called me a failure who always depended on others. I said this time was different. I pulled out a silver tael and offered Lindan double his monthly wage. Xiao Zhuan snatched the coin, bit it to check if it was real, and suddenly became very friendly. Lin was uncomfortable taking that much money, but I told him the work would be worth it. On the walk back, I told him I didn't need farming tools. I needed weapons. He laughed and said it was impossible without a proper furnace. So I opened my courtyard gate and showed him mine. He glanced at the dome-shaped furnace and laughed again, but when I fired it up and worked the bellows and the flames went white hot, his jaw dropped. "The best forge in the city can't put out heat like this," he said, asking me over and over where I'd learned to build it. I lied and said I'd found the design in an old book. Shur was standing nearby. I knew she didn't buy it, but she didn't say anything. Lin got straight to work. Using high-quality iron from my furnace, combined with his skill, he forged a beautiful dagger. The blade was smooth as water, sharp enough to cut a deep groove in stone without a single chip. Lin was ecstatic. He said as he got more familiar with the furnace, the weapons would only get better. I picked up the dagger and handed it to Shur. She was stunned. After all, she'd stabbed me with a knife just days ago. She asked if I wasn't afraid she'd use it against me. I looked her in the eyes and said, "She's my wife. I trust her. Why would I be afraid?" Something in her face softened, just a little. But I noticed that night trouble came. Masked men showed up at our house looking to hurt my family. I was deep asleep when something woke me, a cold hand on my shoulder and a strange voice, "Wake up, bad men are coming." I opened my eyes. Nobody was there, like a ghost. No time to think. I crept quietly to the window and spotted them, Wang Biao, Hosen, and two others, scaling the wall. Knives and hatchets in hand, rage written all over their faces. This was their payback for what I'd done on the road. I needed my bow. But before I could move, they kicked in the door and charged toward the bedroom. The women screamed. The men pressed blades to their throats and told them to shut up. My wives were trembling, crying, pressing their hands over their own mouths. Wang Biao kept demanding to know where I was. Nobody said a word. Then their eyes landed on Shur. She'd washed off the coal, and her true beauty was on full display. They all stopped cold. They'd heard my wives were plain, but Shur looked like she was from another world entirely. They started fighting over her like animals, saying disgusting things. Shur folded her hands and went pale, but her eyes burned with the will to fight. She would rather die than lose her honor. Wang Biao shoved the others aside and stepped toward her with a filthy grin, telling her to forget about me and come with him. That's when I released the arrow. The arrow flew through the doorway and caught one of the men square. He screamed and dropped. Everyone froze. I stepped inside, compound bow in hand, second arrow already drawn, the same bow that had taken down the wild boar. I looked at them and said exactly what was in my heart. "How dare you put your hands on my wife? Get ready to die." I dropped two of them instantly. A third went down right after. The compound bow was no joke. Arrows punched clean through bone and pinned men to the wall. Wang Biao and Hosen locked up with fear. They'd never seen a weapon like it. But Wang Biao was sharp. He grabbed Shur and pressed a knife to her throat, using her as a human shield. I had him in my sights, but I couldn't fire without hitting her. We were at a standstill, neither of us willing to make the first move. Then Shur moved. She pulled out the dagger I'd given her and drove it straight into Wang Biao. He screamed and slashed at her with his knife. Right at that moment, out of nowhere, a rock came flying and cracked him in the back. He went down. I have no idea where that rock came from, but I didn't waste a second. I released the arrow. It passed clean through Hosen and caught Wang Biao too. But he had hidden armor underneath his clothes. It saved his life. He hurled himself through the window and vanished into the darkness. Shur had just a small scratch. She was okay. The women were shaking, still in shock. 3 bodies were lying on the floor of our home. I sent everyone to the other room while I cleaned up. The next morning, Lin Dan came over to work and nearly passed out when he saw the bodies. I walked him through everything. He couldn't believe I'd taken on 4 armed men by myself. He said I was a completely different person. The old Jiang Yuwei used to be scared of wringing a chicken's neck. I told him 7 wives will change a man. Then Lin Dan gave me a serious warning. Wang Biao had a brother who ran with the Wolf Ridge gang, the most dangerous crew in the entire area. The government couldn't even keep them in check. If Wang Biao went to them for backup, my whole family was in danger. I was also still thinking about what had woken me up the night before. That cold hand, that strange voice. All 7 women had been asleep. Someone was hiding something. I was about to head to the officials to file a report when they showed up at my door themselves. And Wang Biao was right there with them, limping, smug look plastered on his face. He pointed at me and started yelling that I'd killed his friends and stolen his money. The whole village came out to watch. The families of the dead men were weeping. Ozen's elderly mother was cursing me out. A woman clutched her child and called me a killer. Some guy shouted that I should pay with my life. Half the village was ready to string me up. Lin Dan stepped forward and spoke up for me, said it was clearly self-defense. Then my 7 wives stepped out. Shelley and Yu looked the crowd dead in the eye and said plainly, "No man walks into someone's home at night with weapons unless he means to cause harm. My husband just protected us." The rest of the women backed her up and told the truth. The mood in the crowd started to shift. Everyone knew Wang Biao's crew were troublemakers. People were turning against him. But Wang Biao still had one more card to play. He told the officer that I had attacked them on the road and stolen his money, and that his silver was marked with his name and they'd find it on me. My stomach dropped. He was right. I had taken his money on the road. That marked silver was in my pocket. The officer searched me and found it. Wang Biao was grinning like he'd already won. My wives went pale. But when the officer looked at the marking, it didn't say Biao, it said, "I love my wife." Wang Biao grabbed it and read it himself. The color drained from his face. He had no idea what had happened. I kept a completely straight face and explained to everyone that I had engraved those words myself to remind me of my love for my 7 wives. Shir and the others turned red. I knew they thought I was shameless, but deep down I could tell it landed. I handed the silver over to the officers as a community fee and asked them to investigate Wang Biao for breaking into my home and threatening my family. They hauled him away while he kept screaming that I was setting him up. As they were leaving, one officer glanced hard at Shir and said she looked familiar. My chest tightened. Shir stayed cool and said she was just one of the girls sent over for marriage arrangements. The officer shrugged and moved on. But I noticed, and I filed it away. When we were alone, Shir asked how I'd pulled off the silver trick. I told her the truth. I knew Wang Biao would use marked silver to trap me, so after building the furnace, I melted it down and re-engraved it. A furnace that can melt iron handles silver easily. She was impressed, but still tense. She said the local officials were corrupt and Wang Biao wouldn't stay locked up for long. I agreed. I told her we'd need to deal with him permanently. She looked shocked for a moment, then slowly nodded. She said her experience had taught her, if you don't finish a problem, it comes back bigger. I caught that. Her experience. What kind of experience does a young refugee have that teaches her something like that? I asked her about the officer who'd recognized her. She bit her lip and told me to stay out of it. She said knowing her secret could get me killed. She and her sister Manman were already quietly planning to leave before their trouble caught up with them. She didn't want to drag me into it. I put my hand on her shoulder and said she was my wife, even if only in name. If trouble came, I wasn't going to stand by and watch. Her eyes went red. She turned away fast and wiped her tears before I could see. Later, I overheard Manman telling Shir that I was a good man and maybe she should actually start thinking of me as her real husband. Shir told her no. She said the gap in their backgrounds was too wide and their situation was too dangerous. If their secret ever came out, everyone around them would die, including me. I was standing right around the corner, hands tied. They didn't think I could protect them. To them, I was just a poor village hunter, nothing against a powerful enemy. Right there, I made a silent vow I would protect them, and one day Shir would call me her husband, and mean it. I went to Young Trading Company with over 20 weapons. Knives, spears, swords. Manager Wu examined every single piece and couldn't stop talking about the quality. He offered 500 silver coins for the whole lot, more than I'd expected. I gave him 10 coins as a thank you, following Shir's advice that building long-term business relationships was the smarter play. He was pleased and offered to help me source more iron ore. He took me by carriage to a mining area where I met a young man named Jin. Around 20, well-dressed, confidence practically radiating off him. When Wu told him I was the one who'd taken down the wild boar, Jin laughed out loud. He looked me up and down, took in my lean frame and said flat out, "That's not possible." He made me a bet. If I could prove I'd killed the boar, he'd give me top-quality iron ore for free. I pulled out my new compound bow. Lin Dan had rebuilt it using my improved design, lighter, stronger, and more powerful than before. The crowd stared at the strange weapon, completely baffled. I stepped back 100 paces, drew the string, released. The arrow punched clean through the target and split it in two. Dead silence. Then Jin transformed completely. That cocky young master was gone, replaced by an eager kid with wide eyes. He walked up, bowed, and said, "Take me as your student." He said my archery was divine, and he would serve me like a father. Internally, I thought, that's the bow, not me. But I couldn't exactly say that. I told him I'd think about it. Taking on a student was serious, and our family techniques weren't shared lightly. Out of respect, he loaded up a full cart of the finest iron ore and sent me off with it, no charge. I was in a good mood heading back. That lasted about half an hour. The road ahead was blocked, the Wolf Ridge gang, and Wang Biao right there with them. 9 men stepped out of the brush on a mountain trail. The officials had already let him go. Useless system. Their leader was a big guy with a scar running across his face. They called him Brother Moji. They took one look at my lean build and started laughing. One of them said he could kill 10 guys like me with one finger. Another said he'd finish me off and pay a visit to my wives after. My blood started boiling. Brother Moji told me to just kill myself and save everyone the time. He said he'd personally take my beautiful wife and enjoy himself. I answered in a flat, cold voice, "Whoever touches my women dies." But this time, I was ready. After the last attack, I'd known Wang Biao might come back with the Wolf Ridge gang. So I'd built something new, a sleeve arrow, hidden right up my sleeve. A small compound bow with a dual pulley system, more powerful than anything this era had ever seen. The moment the first bandit came charging at me with a knife, I raised my arm and fired. The sleeve arrow hit him square in the head. He was dead before he hit the ground. They all rushed me at once. I kept firing. Sleeve arrow for close range, compound bow for distance. Arrows drove straight through them. They had no armor. One by one they dropped. Within seconds, 7 bandits were on the ground. Brother Moji snapped. He grabbed his sword and came at me full speed, screaming that he'd fight to his last breath. I put an arrow in his body, then fired 3 more from the sleeve arrow just to make sure. He dropped without a sound. Now only Wang Biao was left. He just stood there, frozen, staring at the pile of bodies he'd brought with him. Every drop of color had drained from his face. I raised my bow and aimed it straight at him. Wang Biao collapsed to his knees. He started crying and begging. Called me uncle, said he'd serve me like a dog. I told him to bark. He barked, without a single moment of hesitation. Then I said one last thing to him. Never even think about hurting my women again. I drew my dagger and took his head. The moment it was over, my entire body started shaking. My stomach turned inside out and I doubled over and threw up. In my previous life, I had never hurt a single person, and now I had just beheaded someone at close range. The blood, the body still twitching, it was all too much. I kept retching until there was nothing left. I stood there asking myself, what am I becoming? Is this world changing me, or was I always capable of this? I decided it didn't matter. I had to be strong. That was the only way to keep my family alive. Then a voice came from behind me. "Master, you're absolutely incredible." I spun around instantly, hand already on the sleeve arrow. It was Jin Jin, the mine owner's son. He'd followed me because he'd forgotten to get my contact information, and he'd watched the entire fight. That was a problem. If word got out that I'd killed Wolf Ridge gang members, the whole crew would come for my family. I looked Jin Jin dead in the eyes and asked him straight. Wasn't he afraid I'd kill him to keep him quiet? He stayed calm. He said he believed I was a good man who didn't kill without reason. Smart kid. I told him there was only one way to guarantee his silence. He'd have to become my accomplice. One bandit was still alive, lying on the ground. I told Jin Jin to finish him. His hands were trembling. Sweat was running down his face. But he understood exactly what it meant. If he was in it with me, he'd never say a word. He pulled out his knife, closed his eyes, and struck. The man died. After that, I officially took Jin Jin on as my disciple. He bowed 3 times, absolutely thrilled. My reasons were my own. He'd stay quiet, and his iron ore mines would fuel my weapons business. We cleaned everything up and got out fast. What I didn't know was that back at Wolf Ridge, their leader had already found the bodies. He was shaking with rage, flipping tables, demanding answers. He'd already sent his men out to find the killer. He wanted that person and their entire family dead. The hunt had begun, and it was heading straight for me. I came home and laid over 300 taels of silver on the table in front of my wives. Their eyes went wide. It was more than enough to cover the head tax for all 8 of us, with plenty left over. I also brought gifts, hairpins, rouge, silk fabric, small embroidered sachets. They were so happy they couldn't even find the words. Then I asked them to properly introduce themselves. First wife, Sure. Second, Chen Lianu. Third, Lin Jixia. Fourth, Ji, possibly a nickname. Fifth, Li Ting. Sixth, Juan. Seventh, Man. Man was Sure's little sister, only 8 or 9 years old.